Hello, everybody. Hi. All right. My name is J.D. Gens. I am the Executive Director of the Travis County Democratic Party. This is our coordinated campaign headquarters. Thank you for being here. The coordinated campaign is a place where Democrats come together to run our election for the fall. So we have the Wendy Davis campaign, the Tisha Van de Putte, Mike Collier's people, all the way down to our local candidates here in the headquarters. And as an issue that we all know is very important is property tax reform. So I'm happy that we're able to host a forum and a press conference here. I'm going to speak briefly on behalf of Senator Kirk Watson, who could not be here today, but I know this is a very important issue. And then I'm going to turn it over and we're going to get the program going. Of course, if you have any questions or if you're out in cyberspace and you have a question, you can text it, or excuse me, tweet it to TXFairTax, and we will do our best to get it asked during the press conference. And of course, if you have a question in the audience, we'll have a microphone going around and you can ask yourself. So, like I said, Senator Watson could not be here today, but he does have a statement. All taxpayers have the right to be assessed their fair share, no more, no less, of the cost for good schools, needed roads, safe communities, well-maintained parks, and the other necessities of a quality of life. And we all have the right to know and trust that the tax system will be fair in its treatment of all taxpayers. Right now, it's hard to trust an opaque and confusing system that is riddled with loopholes. Last month, I proposed several common sense policy changes aimed at restoring that trust. Improve accuracy and transparency in the property appraisal by requiring sales price disclosure. Tighten the standards of evidence for legal challenges to appraisals. Discourage frivolous lawsuits by requiring both sides, not just the taxpayer, via the appraisal district, to pay legal costs if they lose in court. And move up the deadlines for appraisal notices and protests to allow the process to work well for all taxpayers. It's in everyone's interest to address the concerns that some deep-pocketed taxpayers are gaming the system at the expense of homeowners. Fairness and transparency should be our goals. And if you're from the press, I have copies of this you can have as well. And I do appreciate it. This is an issue that's very important to us. We're here in East Austin right now. This is a central spot for a Democratic base, but this is also the front line for a lot of people who are getting priced out of their homes. So I'm really glad that we're taking this issue up as the Democratic Party. I'm glad we have a great candidate for County Commissioner, Place 2. Needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce her anyways. Her name's Brigid Shea, and she's been raising a lot of hell over this, and that's really good. She's got it into the state party platform, and there's a copy of the platform in the back if you want that. She's got the Wendy Davis campaign talking about it on the campaign trail, although Wendy has been doing great work, and I don't think she's going to let up anytime soon. So without further ado, here's Brigid Shea.
Yeah, I'm actually on record saying I feel really strongly about this, and I know I have to stand up so you can see me over the podium, and I'm not going to shut up about it. Actually, I really do think this is a justice issue and a fairness issue. As I have gone door to door in the course of my campaign for Travis County Commissioner, I have lost track of the number of people who've told me standing at their doorstep that they can't afford to live in their homes anymore, and that they're going to have to sell and move, and they don't want to move. And their point is, where else can I afford to move to in Austin? So the Statesman has done a great job laying out this issue. And the key headline that explains it all is, you pay more, they pay less. How Texas' tax appraisal system benefits commercial properties, shifting an unfair burden onto homeowners. And that's the nut of this issue. Let me just ask, though, if you could do a show of hands real quick. How many people have seen the Real Values for Texas video that explains this? The media has as well? Because if everybody's seen it, we don't need to show it now, but for the audience that might be tuning in on the webcast, we will show it at the briefing that starts at 11, so you'll get a chance to see that. And before I go on the issues too, I want to just take a moment. Would the candidates for any office, I know there's some school board candidates here, I know there's city council candidates here. If you're a candidate for any office, would you please just raise your hand so we can know, and I'll tell the listening audience too. Mike's a candidate too. There's probably 8 people here in the room, in the audience here. Hopefully there'll be some on the webcast as well. But this is an issue that affects every level of government. And I just want to say, I think it's really important that the Democratic Party has taken such a strong stand on this. It is in the state Democratic Party platform calling for a reform of the broken property tax appraisal system. And by contrast, and I can read the language, we also have copies of it there in the back. And let me just take a minute and read it really quickly. The state party platform calls for eliminating tax loopholes and unproductive special breaks to simplify the tax system, reforming the property tax appraisal system to guarantee uniform appraisals and eliminate the loopholes that allow business, mineral, and commercial properties to be taxed at far below market value, which shifts the burdens to homeowners. Structured property tax relief to benefit all homeowners fairly and prevent families from being taxed out of their homes when land values rise inordinately, and extend the benefits of property tax relief to renters when landlords receive the full benefit of those reductions. So the Democratic Party is squarely on the side of so many citizens, and this is not a partisan issue, but the difference is stark. The Democratic Party is squarely on the side of people who are struggling to make ends meet and pay their property taxes and be able to stay in their homes or afford their rents. The Republican Party, they call for the abolishment of property taxes with no meaningful proposal. That's in the Republican Party platform, state platform. I think their position on this borderlines on reckless. And I think when the taxpayers and the citizens of the state see that they have a true choice between fixing a broken system that will allow for sufficient revenue to maintain local roads and police and parks and pools and libraries versus either blowing up any kind of revenue system and not replacing it with anything meaningful, or leaving the broken system in place so that eventually communities will be starved of the revenue that they need to provide basic services for quality of life. I think people they'll choose to fix the broken system. And that's the choice that's before us. But I want to say finally on the partisan point, the Republicans' chief philosopher is Grover Norquist, and his stated position is that their goal is to shrink government until it is small enough to drown in the bathtub. You can look it up. He is on record. That is the stated position of the chief sort of political leader and philosopher of the Republican Party. So I think the contrast is very stark. The Democrats are on the side of standing up for working families and individuals who are struggling under an unfair system, and the Republicans' plan is either blow it up and provide no alternative or continue the unbelievably unfair system. So I'm going to introduce Mike Collier real briefly. I can't really do justice to it, except I think this is an important point. I have never been so excited to hear an accountant speak in my life. So take it away, Mike Collier. He's running for Comptroller, and I'm going to ask him to introduce himself as well.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks very much. Thanks very much for coming. I drove through the rain, and I loved it. I swore I'd never complain about rain again. And I almost forgot how to drive through the rain, and I think my fellow Texans forgot how to drive through the rain, but we made it safely. So I'm Mike Collier, and I'm running for Comptroller. I'm coming out of the business world to do this. I'm a certified public accountant. When I saw that Susan Combs was stepping down, I called the Democratic Party, and I said I'd like to step up. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is that I'm very dissatisfied with politics generally, and particularly in Texas. When you think about, so the biggest issues we deal with is fairness and taxes and spending, and I think to have a real certified public accountant, a real financial executive in that role is hugely valuable for Texas, and so I called and volunteered for duty, and the party took me up on my offer, and it's a terrific experience. So we're going to talk today about property taxes. We'll answer questions along the way. What I'd like to do is just level set the issue on property taxes, whether we should even have property taxes. There's a suggestion that we get rid of property taxes because we don't like it. It's more than a suggestion. It's a plank in the Republican Party platform that we eliminate the property tax. My opponent is campaigning on that basis. It's a terrible idea, and I'll tell you why. First of all, we have 4,000 political subdivisions in the state. Their revenues come from property taxes. You have a property tax roll, you apply a rate, that's your revenues, and it keeps things local. I think keeping things local is important. That's a Texas value. The property tax system keeps things local. Second, if you replaced it with a sales tax sales tax would be extraordinarily high. The number that comes out of property taxes is roughly $40 billion. Just to put it in context, the revenues that come out of sales taxes today, at 6.25% at the state level, is roughly $30 billion. The revenues that come out of property taxes is roughly $40 billion. It is a very large number. If you were to get rid of the property tax completely and replace it with a sales tax would have to double or triple. Some economists have looked at it and said our sales tax might become between 20 and 25% because it would also affect consumer behavior, and that would then again affect. So to replace those revenues, you'd have to triple. Now, and if we were to double or triple the sales tax, it would have an unbelievably damaging effect on our retail economy. I mean, I think all the merchants would head for the borders. It would be a disaster. It's a terrible idea. It's an absolutely terrible idea. We need to stop discussing that. The Republican Party needs to take it out of their platform. What we need to do is fix the property tax system. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Now, the property tax system in its simplest form, per our Constitution, is that if you have a property that's to be taxed, it shall be appraised at market value. Everyone who owns property, it shall be appraised at market value. That's in our Constitution. That's the organic legal document. We must legally drive towards that. Besides, that's what we've agreed with. That's what's fair. Okay? Now, if you own a home and it's appraised, the appraisers try to drive towards market value. They have a lot of information to drive towards market value. It's not as complicated to value a home as it is with a large commercial or industrial property, as we'll discuss. It isn't perfect. In fact, there's so many imperfections, we'd have to have a whole day-long session devoted to just residential values. But if you have a home and it's appraised, it's likely to be close to market value, and you might be able to complain and adjust and so forth. But that's pretty much a reliable number. If you own a large industrial or commercial property, it's very hard to appraise. Because the way you appraise a large industrial commercial property is based on a lot of things, including its cash flow, including its marketability. These things don't change hands a lot. There's a lot of judgment involved in a large commercial industrial property. An appraiser in the first instance does his or her best, you hope. There are overzealous appraisers, which we have to protect against, and there are incompetent appraisers we have to protect against. But they try in the first instance to drive toward market value. If you own a large commercial or industrial property and you don't think it's fair, you can appeal. And it's the appeal process that we're going to talk about. Because buried in the appeal process are certain defects. Those are my words, defects, that have the following result. You have a large commercial or industrial property. You're handed an appraisal. You then can look to see, by comparison to comparable properties, is it fair? You make your case. Let's say I own a downtown skyscraper. I think I've been appraised too high. I find 2 or 3 other skyscrapers in town, show that they're worth less. That's the appeal process. That is a perfectly sensible feature to the law. It's a great way to protect against an overzealous or an incompetent appraiser. But it is also a great way to game the system. And therein lies the problem. Because what we found over the last decade is owners of large industrial and commercial properties will pick properties that aren't comparable. So I might have a downtown skyscraper, brand new, great tenant, great location, and I might pick skyscrapers that are in another part of town, not as new, not as good tenant roll. My appraiser says I'm worth $500 million. I find 2 buildings that are worth $300 million. I argue that I really ought to be worth $300 million, and down it goes. Because that's the way the appeal process works. That's the way it's interpreted by the courts. Not in every instance, but in enough instances that we really, as citizens, need to focus on this. Now, there's anecdotal evidence that we have a problem, and it takes this form. A large commercial or industrial property will be appraised at $200 million. And it'll sell for $300 million. That would suggest that 200 wasn't the right appraisal. And if you read the newspapers, there's been lots and lots of work done on this. This pattern repeats itself again and again and again and again. But really what got my attention after Brigid called and said, focus on this, was the large appraisal districts back in 2006 did a calculation, and they said the magnitude of the problem is $4 billion a year. That means, if that's true, then it isn't fair that these large industrial and commercial properties aren't paying their fair share of taxes. It's $4 billion less. That was 2006. Lord knows what it is today. They're paying less, therefore we're paying more. You really should think of it as all flowing into the same pot. And this is not a Democrat or Republican issue, okay? Democrats and Republicans alike have been tracking this issue and have worked on the issue and have proposed legislation. And I'm going to offer 3 avenues that we should consider going down to solve this problem. Each time it comes before the legislature, it dies. It's just left unattended. Anytime you have a tax system, all tax systems are complex. You have to tend to them. This is left unattended. So that's what we need to do. Now, the Comptroller doesn't pass legislation. I can't fix this. The only thing I can do is analyze the numbers, bring you the facts, and then you call your senator and you call your representative. That's what this meeting's about. That's what my campaign's about. That's my aspiration as Comptroller. Now, how do we fix it? There's 3 paths we should go down to fix this. The legislature should go down to fix this. We should tighten the definition of comparable property. So if you appeal your valuation relative to other comparable properties, they have to be comparable. What's so hard about that? In the law presently, it just says comparable, but it doesn't define it. The courts have been very generous in their interpretation. So let's tighten it up and say that it has to be comparable with respect to such things as age, usefulness, tenant, etc., etc. So tighten up that definition. 1. Second, price discovery. You know, if your home is being appraised, the appraiser has access. It ain't perfect, because you're not required to disclose the transaction value on homes, but there's the internet and there's multiple listing services and there's a way, and so there's price discovery around your home. Whereas large commercial industrial properties, when they change hands, aren't required to disclose price. That's where the appraiser keys off on the valuation and the prices aren't disclosed. Most states in the union have some form of price disclosure. Texas is one of 4 that does not. If you had price disclosure, then you'd have much more reliability in the appraisers. Some form of price disclosure, and I'll come back to that. Finally, who pays the legal fees in a dispute? So if you're a large industrial or commercial property and you appeal and you win, the judge might very well tell the appraisal district to pay your legal fee. Now, I argue that that's a bad answer, because if I own a large industrial or commercial property and I stand to gain a lot by paying less taxes, I'll put a huge legal fee at risk. That's just the risk-return economics. The appraisal district has nothing to gain. They're just an administrative intermediary. And so we find in practice that they don't settle towards a fair answer. They settle towards an acceptable answer in terms of minimizing the legal fees. So point number 3, let's just have everybody pay their own legal fees. So those 3 technical solutions should result in commercial industrial properties over time finding their way up to market, and I recommend that. That's my recommendation to my neighbors, and I hope my neighbors call their senators and representatives. Now, thank you. Very simple. Now I want to emphasize a point, which is being able to compare your asset to other assets is hugely valuable for all of us. So when we go down these paths, I think we need to have teams to work on it. It needs to be done on a bipartisan basis. We ought to have folks that look at it all the different ways. You don't want the law of unintended consequences anytime you deal with tax. You don't want the law of unintended consequences to make things worse when you intended to make them better. I know for a fact that there are people with commercial industrial properties that are actually above market, and then I'm not quite sure how to. So the idea is, let's just take politics out of it. Let's design the appeal process so when we're finished, we as Texans have the confidence that everybody's stated at market value and that it's fair. If we do that, and if the appraisal districts are right, that'll put $4 billion back into what we have available for schools, roads, and water. It's as simple as that. Now, I think when you came in, we said, let's talk about house appraisals. There's an area that we need to work on together as Texans. It's not just state, it's state and local. Brigid, there's lots and lots of imperfections in terms of home appraisals and what that means, and your property tax goes up. Some people are priced out of their house. To a large extent, that's a local issue, a school district issue, a county issue, etc. I really do think that we should work together to try to find some solutions to that, because it's painful and there's a lot of anxiety, and that's not really what's intended here. And that's really beyond the scope of this discussion. We should have another discussion. The fact that you're here means that you're interested and that we ought to keep this dialogue going. And by the time the legislature meets in January, February, we ought to think about dealing with all of these things to try to drive towards fairness. So that's our point, and I'm going to be traveling around the state having this conversation with my neighbors, fellow Texans, and call your senator, call your representative, and let's solve this problem. It's simple. So why don't we take some questions? Yes, sir.
From the media, actually, can we do the media questions? Yeah, let's do
Media questions first?
Yes.
Okay.
We will get to the town hall questions.
Yeah, we'll have plenty of time for the town hall questions, especially starting at 11. But
Media questions?
Yeah, does anyone from the media have any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
So, if you
we'll repeat it. You want to repeat it? Oh, you've got the microphone. There's stuff I'd said around here.
So, if you're elected comptroller, then what can you do as a comptroller to work out the tax appraisal process to sort of smooth it over for everyone?
Could everybody hear that? As comptroller, what can the comptroller do to work on the tax appraisal process? Inside the comptroller is the property tax assistance division. Comptroller is responsible for visiting all of the appraisal districts every other year and doing a number of technical things, including the methods and practices. So the controller, to some extent, can gather the information, can educate appraisers, in terms of methods and practices, can educate Texans in terms of how it works, can educate the legislature in terms of what steps need to be made to perfect it. A energetic, engaged, determined comptroller can influence the outcome in that respect. But the comptroller doesn't pass laws. So the comptroller doesn't have a vote. What the comptroller has is a voice. And so that's, and I think it's incumbent. I mean, if the comptroller isn't doing this, what leader is? I mean, who in Texas is working on this? I'm not aware of anybody.
Richard.
Does that answer your question? Any other questions?
So the solutions that you proposed are all legislative, and in order to get anything done in the legislature, you need a majority support. So how would you get Republicans over to the side of these sort of reforms that, for the property appraisal system that you're proposing?
Well, it's a great question. First of all, I don't want to call them solutions because I think what they are avenues that we need to go down. For example, I don't want to leave the false impression that I believe that everybody should pay their own legal fees under all circumstances. So when we think about that one avenue, we also need to protect homeowners. For example, I can't afford a lawyer and I don't have the time to sue. I don't want to have to pay if an overzealous appraiser comes in and gives me a bad number and I've got to track it down. I'm not necessarily advocating that homeowners have to pay their own legal fees. But, you know, if I own a large, complex asset and pull together a huge and costly team, that's a different proposition. So I emphasize the point that each of these they're all avenues that we need to go down to make sure that it makes sense when we're finished for everybody. What was the second half of your question again? I'm sorry.
My question was about how
to do it.
Winning Republican support for these
Thank you.
avenues.
Well, I'll tell you this. I got a lot of Republican friends. And when we're finished, they agree with me. And they're scratching their heads wondering why in the world are they just now hearing about this? Right? When Brigid called me,
I'll say something.
when I first stepped into and I came into the campaign asking the question, why are my property taxes going up and yet we can't fund schools and roads? There's got to be a hole in this boat. I mean, I'm a financial guy and business is booming. Where's the problem? Well, I'm finding all sorts of things that we can tighten up and fix. This is one of them. I don't think it's going to be difficult at all for Republicans to grasp this and call their senators and representatives. It's not a Democrat versus Republican issue.
Andrew, I'm going to take a crack at that too. I'm going to jump in here. Thanks, Mike.
Please.
Part of what we're doing today is actually getting that word out. This is a statewide webcast. And if you haven't already tweeted about it, please do at #TXFairTax. It's on the board right behind the cameraman's head. So get the word out to people. That's part of what we're doing with having a statewide webcast. We've sent the word out through a lot of different mechanisms around the state. And the point is, this is a hidden subsidy. Most people aren't aware that they're being forced to subsidize commercial property. They just think they're mad at their appraisal district or they're mad at their local governmental entity because they think they're raising taxes too high, when the reality is the underlying system is broken. And so we're actively getting the word out. We're working through many, many different channels to spread this word, because this is not a partisan issue. I maintain that this issue has the greatest ability to move independent voters and infrequent voters to get out of their chairs and go vote, because people are really hurting. This is one of those issues, and I've worked on community issues for 25 years. I have never seen an issue where people are as furious and as frightened. And that's a powerful combination. It's also a dangerous combination because somebody can demagogue on it and come in and say, I'll save the day, we want to do away with all your property taxes. And that'll sound good to some people. So that's part of why we're doing this webcast and this kind of outreach as well, to educate people about the underlying invisible problem, which is this broken appraisal process. And then we are doing outreach. We're doing outreach in people's legislative districts. We're doing outreach across the board. So I think that's part of the goal. We're not saying it's going to be easy, but as Mike said, and I think many of us have probably had this experience, people's partisan identity goes away when you start talking with them about why their property taxes are so crazy high and why their appraisals are skyrocketing. And when they hear it's a broken system, they want it fixed. So I think there's a great opportunity to reach out to people who might consider themselves Republicans, might consider themselves independents, but to underscore we're committed to fixing this. And we can't do it alone. We need your help.
Anyone else from the media have any questions? All right.
While you think about questions, I'd like to add one point to what Brigid said. You know, my aspiration is to take politics out and put competence and transparency in. But you got to ask about the other guy who's running for comptroller, and ask him what his position on this issue is. You know, he's silent. He won't debate. He won't discuss. One of the three fixes that we've been discussing came before his committee, and he killed it. Right? So I'm not going to answer for him, but I think he needs to answer to us. And so I don't really want to get into politics on the one hand. On the other hand, there's politics stamped all over this defect. That's what we have to solve. Thank you very much. Thank you.
For anybody watching online, we'll be back at 11. Thank you so much. We're going to take a break now and let the news media interview the participants. We'll be back at 11. Thank you.